Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this afternoon entitled Data Resilience in Action, Securing, Detecting, and Recovering from Cyberattacks. My name is Colleen Causey. I'm one of your hosts for today's webinar. I am a National Account Manager with A&M. I have 25 plus years of experience in both the IT and telecommunications industries. And I also have an 11-year-long relationship with the group purchasing organization of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. A&M does have a national contract in place with Blue Cross that allows any Blue Cross plan or subsidiary company to purchase equipment, software, and services from A&M. So before we start today's webinar, I did want to point out that we highly encourage questions throughout the webinar. So if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see both a chat icon or a Q&A icon. Please feel free to post any questions. And as one of your hosts for the call, I will be monitoring both of those boxes throughout the call, and we'll try and answer those questions as quickly as we possibly can. So what I would also like to do before we get started with deep diving into our data resilience topic, I think it's important to do a brief overview on A&M as a company, since there are several people on this call that may not be familiar with A&M. So we know that you have a lot of choices out there for partners and vendors. So why A&M? Well, we provide three different pillars of value add, and those are speed, flexibility, and support. So on this slide, you'll see our top 26 manufacturers that we represent. We have a deep technical expertise and industry experience in all 26 of these manufacturers. But what we find from a lot of our A&M customers is that even more importantly than technical expertise as part of that experience with a vendor is whether you have exceptional response times, strong communication, reliability, and delivery excellence. And for the past 30 years, A&M has grown because we have focused on those factors, and we deliver that outstanding customer experience because of that. And that customer experience is demonstrated in our Net Promoter Score of 97. So that 97 score is out of 100, and it reflects our customer loyalty and satisfaction. So those of you who aren't familiar with Net Promoter, it is a very popular third-party organization that puts together those scores. And what's interesting to note is the average score in the IT industry is between 30 to 50. So A&M's 97 score is truly world-class, and it's the reason why our customers stay with us. But as I mentioned earlier, A&M has been in business for 30 years now. We started off as simply a Cisco reseller, and as you can see here, we've grown. We have over 250 different manufacturers that we represent today. We are a very healthy, financially stable company, and what that means for your business is that we invest in support. We're proud that we're an engineering-led organization, and that is seen in our engineering to sales ratio. We have 6 sales engineers to every 1 salesperson. And what it means for you is that we have the ability to deep dive into your business to come up with the right IT solutions for you. So I mentioned we do have 250 manufacturers that we represent. So obviously A&M has a very broad service portfolio. We split our company up into 3 different segments, and those segments are risk mitigation, enterprise infrastructure, and innovation. And then obviously within each of those, we have different organizations. Now, today's topic, data resilience, falls under our data center and cloud division of the company. Within that division, we have an exceptional bench of engineers, and I'm very excited for one of those exceptional engineers to be doing today's webinar. So I'm thrilled to introduce to you Zach Croxford. So Zach, I will pass the baton off to you today.
All right, thank you very much, Colleen. So yes, my name is Zach Croxford. Thanks for joining the webinar today. I am a solutions architect. I've been at A&M for a little over a year now, about 15 months in total. I am focused squarely on data protection and BCDR, business continuity, data restoration technologies. So I do cover national accounts, right? So I cover Colleen, cover the entire United States from a national perspective. And I also work in regional accounts here as well. In total, I've got about 28 years working in IT, focusing specifically on data center technologies. Haven't always been on the partner side. Have spent a good amount of years on the customer side. Worked for JPMorgan Chase in their North American storage delivery team. And then locally here in Phoenix, I worked for Sun Construction, wore many hats there as an engineer, architect, moved into management, and then ultimately became the IT director at Sun Construction. I do have several years of experience working for manufacturers as well. So on the primary storage side, I've worked for Tagile, which is a multi-protocol primary storage vendor. So they offer a block and NAS solution. And I also worked for Tintry, which was NAS storage specifically for virtualization. I believe both of those technologies have now been acquired and are owned by a company called DDN. But then focusing more on the data protection side and BCDR, I work for Zerto, and I've also worked for Cohesity, which is a next-gen data protection company. Spent about 6 years at Cohesity in total. And of course, now I'm on the partner side. I'm able to focus on a broad set of technologies, right? I don't have to focus in on a specific one to sell to a customer. So I really get to focus in on what makes sense and what fits the needs of the client. And as I mentioned here before, I am based in Phoenix, Arizona, and sure enough, here in the summer, it is hot. So that is a little bit of my background, where I've come from, and we're going to get into the agenda now. So what we're going to talk about today is talking about securing your backup infrastructure. This would be considered sort of foundational components, right? So some of these are going to be very easy to implement, right? But that doesn't mean that they are always implemented successfully or in place today. So it's good to rehash these, but they're common sets of features or functions that I see that are commonly not configured right or across the board in a data protection environment. But then we're going to transition. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the new components that data protection companies are including in their packages, right? So threat detection, the ability to go out and hunt for malware inside of your data protection snapshots. Data classification. So if a threat was detected, what data did it touch or impact? And then cyber vaulting, right? So this concept of a golden copy of your data stored somewhere, preferably off-prem or off-site, right? Could be up at a hyperscaler, typically managed by a data protection company. We're going to go through some best practices around cyber recovery and some best practices around restore testing, all encompassed around a cyber event, if you will. And then we'll wrap up with a brief slide that will touch upon some security resources that I put together. So if you're interested in reviewing them, we can get you the slide deck and you'll be able to check out that material as well. But I'm going to reference a lot of those solutions throughout the various slides I had, and we'll just pull them all together for you in a resource list at the very end. All right, so let's get into the presentation here. So the first slide here, right? So why even secure your backup infrastructure, okay? Well, it doesn't take much of a Google search to go out and just type in ransomware and see the effects that it's having today across the industry, right? So it doesn't matter the type of business, the vertical, or the sector, everyone is impacted by malware, specifically these ransomware attacks. I've included some pretty good metrics from a recent Sophos ransomware report. Stated here in 2023 that 94% of organizations hit by ransomware had said that the attackers tried to compromise their backup solution, right? And across all sectors or verticals, 57% of backup compromise attempts were successful, right? So if they can get in and they have that dwell time, maybe that's 30 days, 60 days. Attackers have gotten a lot better and refined their techniques. Maybe it's only a matter of a few days now for that dwell time, but they are definitely going to try to compromise your backup infrastructure, because if they can get rid of your insurance policy, you've got no way to recover data, you're more likely to pay them that ransom. right? 70% of ransomware attacks, according to that Sophos report, resulted in data encryption. That's your typical ransomware event right there. And then to expand upon that, in 32% of incidents where data was encrypted, data was also stolen, right? So there was exfiltration of that data out to perhaps a command and control server or server somewhere out in the dark web. And the hope here is that, okay, we've got your data encrypted on-prem. You're going to pay us ransom to get de-encryption keys. And then, of course, if you don't pay us, we got your copy of your data. If you don't pay us, we'll release this out to the dark web for consumption as well, or for purchase. So that would typically be referred to as a double extortion ransomware event. At the end of the day, we need our backups to be immutable, right? We want a file system where the backup data, once it's ingested, it can't be changed. But we also need it to be indelible, right? So immutability alone is not enough these days. We need immutability plus indelible snapshots that cannot be deleted until retention has expired. Unsecured environments that can be used as a foothold to spread malware, and that is no difference or no change there for data protection. If we've got snapshots that we don't have insight into and I get a request to do a recovery, I could very well re-inject malware back into an environment that had previously been deemed as clean, right? So we want to make sure that we've got foundational security in place at all times across all of our data security landscape. And of course, this is essential for regulatory compliance. And the folks here on the call, right, you're definitely feeling this day in, day out. Could be HIPAA related, could be GDPR, PII, PCI, if you've got payment card related details, right? So we want to make sure that we're secure to meet regulatory compliance. And business continuity depends on secure, recoverable data, right? Systems need to be recovered quickly. They've got to be recovered free of malware. So we want to make sure that, again, those foundational components are locked down from day one. And then, of course, right, there are other components that could impact your environment. Let's say you've got your security foundation locked down. It is, humming along. It's as secure as it can be, but you've got external connectivity to third partners, right? Maybe they provide some additional services to you. Are they secure, right? Is it possible that if they were hit, that their ransomware event or cyber event could spread over that connection to your environment? I've seen that happen, specifically in healthcare. So it's definitely something to be concerned of, right? Keep an eye on and make sure you're talking not only internally with your IT, but if you do have those trusted business partners, make sure you're talking with them as well to see what they've got going on and what they're doing from a security perspective around their data protection and their other systems that are in place as well. All right. So data protection, we've seen a shift to a platform approach, right? So what does that mean? What that means is that data protection is no longer solely focused on just backups and restores. While those are still the cornerstone of data protection, if you will, it's a much broader spectrum now. Additional products have been added into these portfolios to shore up that security component, the security side of the house. So data protection conversations, right, always include a security component. If you're talking to your current provider, or perhaps you are in a cycle where you're going out to take a look and see what else is out there from a data protection perspective, there's always going to be a security component to that discussion. In fact, the majority of the discussion may be focused on security, okay? But the goal today here with these platforms is that backups and restores, we got to have it, but we also have to have that security component wrapped around it as well. The agenda slide, I had a quick little blurb, a quick little screenshot there of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Right, where you got protect, you've got detect, discover, be able to recover and respond from an incident. All of this plays into that NIST sort of wheel framework that you guys are probably leveraging today in your environments. So as these data protection companies are talking to you about their solutions and their platforms, you're going to hear a lot about threat detection and analysis, right? Being able to find indicators of compromise within your backup snapshots. We're not talking about going out and scanning production hosts. We're talking about scanning your backup data, right? And you are going to have lots of it. We've got sources all over the place. It could be VMware, it could be database, file servers, right? What have you. All that data coming into the backup solution, we're doing threat detection and analysis on those snapshots. And of course, data classification is going to be important here as well, right? So we've detected some threats. We need to know what data has been touched, right? The severity of that data or the criticality of that data. Data classification gives us additional insights into that. This concept of a cyber vault, right? Many of you are probably familiar with that term. But think of that as a gold copy of your data that is stored somewhere outside of your network, right? More than likely stored up with a backup provider that's got a SaaS offering, something that they take care of day in, day out, and you subscribe and you literally send a copy of data up there, but they take care of the backend infrastructure. You don't have to do anything like deploy, massive on-prem storage frames or have these lengthy, PS sort of engagements to get that set up. Very simple to consume, and that's cyber vaulting. And of course, zero trust architecture is built around all these data protection platforms as well, right? We never want to trust anyone by default. We always need to authenticate. These data protection platforms today have very granular RBAC, so role-based access control, and then other things like MFA and SSO, right? They're all baked into these technologies today. Of course, the ability to do auditing and provide compliance reports for regulatory mandates, that's critical. The platforms will include built-in reporting to take care of those events as well. The ability to do or perform a platform security posture score, right, based on the vendor's security guides. So this is a pretty slick, pretty much an included component these days for all the platforms, where you can log in, you can take a look at your backup environment, and based off of that vendor's security guidelines, you can see how you rank against what they say you should have enabled, right? So maybe we've got MFA enabled, but we're not using SSO, or maybe we're not doing NTP authentication, right? So it'll give us a good score and show us where we currently sit against the baseline of the vendor's security guide. And of course, these platforms need to be able to handle, cloud native. They need to be workloads. They need to be able to handle SaaS integration, as well as continue to support those on-prem workloads, right? So the environments all over the place. We need to be able to have a nice UI, single UI, if you will, that we can log into and see our on-prem environments, see our cloud environments, see our SaaS integration and protection from those points as well. So have a nice sort of single point of management for all of those environments. And then how can we leverage automation and orchestration, okay? Because we've got all these different environments, all these different systems, and trying to take them on individually, manually, lots of clicking through the UI. We want to be able to leverage automation and orchestration during a cyber event, right? So we're going to get into that a little bit more as we get through some of the further slides here in the deck. And then these platforms are also offering extensibility, right? So they've got a security ecosystem to give you additional integration. So we've got the backup company bringing in the threat detection, they're bringing in data classification, we've got the cyber vault, but we can also now bring in best of breed solutions from, say, the likes of a Zscaler or a CrowdStrike, right? So we can do things like sending data out to a SIEM, whether that's a Splunk or any of the other offerings there. SOAR for security orchestration and automation. Perhaps your security teams on-prem have extended detection and response, or XDR, or endpoint detection and response systems for event correlation. We can tie in the backup platforms with many of those to give them more insights into what's actually happening in the environment. And even primary storage vendors like Pure Storage, right, getting into the fold here. So you'll see, for example, Pure Storage, they've got integration with a lot of the backup vendors today, and we can leverage things like their safe mode snapshots on their arrays to give you that immutability plus that indelible format, right, that can't be deleted until retention expires. So data protection today, much more than just backup and restore. A true platform approach, bringing in security, focusing in on threat detection around ransomware. All right, so let's get into some of those foundational components, right, for securing your backup infrastructure. And some of these seem very basic, but I'm telling you from experience out in the field, and just last week working on a DR assessment, that you think that these would just be set up, by default, and customers would make sure that they're enabled, and they're not, right? So always good to check these. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the common ones I come across that fairly easy to deploy, but are not consistently taken care of in the environments. So number one, securing your backup accounts, okay? So they're going to be default accounts inside the platform when you set this up, or you manage it day to day. Things like an admin account, right? There's a default admin account. Perhaps there is a default support account. There's probably some sort of out-of-band management account for IPMI. And then think of things like at the host level or at a cluster node level. What about BIOS usernames and passwords, right? Are their default set for those? So we want to make sure that we've got those documented, and we want to make sure that they are changed. And they want to make sure if you've got a password vault, that we've stored these accounts inside that password vault, perhaps something like a CyberArk. We want to make sure that we're integrating with SSO, right? So every platform today data protection platform, they're going to support anything SAML 2.0 based. So Duo, Okta, Ping, Enter ID, ADFS, right? All those are going to be supported inside of your data protection platforms. To build upon SSO, we also want to take advantage of MFA, right? We want to enable that for all users, or as many users as possible, right? So your local user accounts, so local admin or support accounts, Active Directory users that are added in, SSO users or groups that are added in as well. We want to make sure MFA is enabled across the board. Now, you may have some accounts that it doesn't make sense, right? So you may have, for example, replication accounts set up between two environments. Well, those replication accounts, right, those are done or handled, authentication is handled between the two environments, right? Perhaps between clusters, between proxies. And there's no way that those systems will be able to provide a time-based one-time password, right? So certain accounts, right, such as replication, may not fit for MFA, but we definitely want to have that granular RBAC enabled, right? The role-based access control that would say this user account is only allowed to do replication, right? From this cluster to another cluster and vice versa. Right, so role-based access control, I'll tell you what, these days, these data protection platforms, very granular, right? You can actually get in and not only can you choose from a nice list of predefined roles for your environment, of course, admin or backup admin, but you can also define your own if you need to have custom roles. But what we want to do here is make sure that we're providing minimum privilege access, right? Just enough access, just enough rights to get your job done. We don't want to give everyone admin access. That would be a massive security risk in your environment, right? If you could think forward on this with a ransomware event, if I'm an admin in the data protection platform, but I really just needed to have data, perhaps backup admin rights where I can perform backups and restores, but I've got full performance or full permissions, if you will, to manage that environment, I could go in and perhaps delete some of your snapshots if we don't have this foundational blocking and tackling done from a security perspective. And also, it's a great idea to review your user and group access on a regular basis, right? Especially as you have new team members joining, or you've got folks that are leaving the company. We want to make sure that the accounts are cleaned up. Perhaps you're doing that at a security group level to make that a bit easier, and good on you if that's the way it's going. But definitely want to make sure we're reviewing those user accounts that have access to these data protection platforms on a regular basis. The next one is very near and dear to my heart, right? The ability to enable worm, right? So write once, read many protection on top of your backup snapshots. This is one that I see commonly baked in or included with most data protection platforms, but not always enabled, right? So with worm snapshot protection enabled, it prevents you from going in and deleting intentionally or accidentally, right, or maliciously, going in and deleting your snapshots. So once worm is enabled, if I perform a backup, say, of a set of virtual machines, I ingest them into the backup platform, onto an immutable file system, worm gets layered on top. I cannot delete that as a backup admin, as a true cluster admin or higher level admin. I cannot delete those snapshots until the retention expires. And if you are starting to run out of space, right, and you try and call up to support at these data protection companies, they will likely tell you there's nothing we can do, right? That's the beauty of worm. It's written once, and based off the retention you've prescribed, we're going to follow those rules, right? So with great power does come great responsibility. If you go in and enable worm and then tell the platform, your data protection platform, that you're going to keep all data for 5 years, it's going to abide by what you tell it to do. And it's going to keep those snapshots for 5 years. You're not going to be able to delete them, right? The beauty of that is if my backup account were to get compromised and a malicious actor logged in as me, try and delete those snapshots, they're not going to be able to do it, right? Conversely, if you're going to store those for 5 years, you might find that you're adding storage pretty regularly, right? Because that's going to build over time. So you got to be careful with how long you set your worm retention, but make sure that you're meeting the business requirements that are set forth through your application mapping, right? Defining your RPOs, your recovery point objectives, and of course, your recovery time objectives. But very common to see that worm just not enabled at all. All right, continuing on down the line here, right? So another component that typically isn't configured is any sort of web session inactivity timeouts and or session limits. Okay, so if I'm logged in and I'm idle for 30 minutes, should the platform kick me out? Yeah, probably should, right? I shouldn't be allowed to have an endless session. I shouldn't probably also be able to have 20, 30 or 100 sessions through the web UI. Same thing would go for SSH, right? If I need to be able to get in through a shell to do some sort of administrative work on the platform, should probably have some sort of limits around the number of shell sessions I can have available at a time. Encryption, right? This is one that is also very important in your environment. Encryption, it's got several different layers to be enabled. Could be enabled, say, at a cluster level, could be enabled at a storage pool level. I'm a big fan of setting it at the highest level possible, and that way, regardless of where the data lands on this data protection platform, I'm going to know that my data is encrypted at rest on that platform. This data encryption oftentimes could be hardware-based, or it could be software-based, right? Sometimes folks kind of look down upon that software-based encryption, but these days, compute has so many cores available, it's pretty minimal hit, right? So if you have a software-based encryption solution, you might see maybe a 2 to 3% overhead to handle that. But even the software-based encryption can rely on chips on the motherboards that help assist it from a encryption perspective. So really minimal overhead, even for software-based. And of course, we want to make sure that our data in flight from a source, be it VMware, be it from a database or file server, we want to make sure that as we're ingesting that, we want to make sure that data is encrypted in flight. That is typically done with something along the likes of TLS. And then, of course, once it hits that platform, we've got the hardware or the software-based encryption at the disk level. And there will be encryption keys, of course, right? So we're dealing with encryption. There will be keys for management. By default, these data protection platforms can manage them local, but they will give you the ability to export them. So if you have a key management system or server in your environment, something along the lines of Fails, right? They've acquired Vormetric a few years ago, then you could export those encryption keys and store them inside of those KMS environments. So that's another option for you to keep those keys nice and secure. How about continuous monitoring of the security of the platform, right? This is something that I also see. It's hit or miss, right? Sometimes you might find one environment has it set up, and the next one it's just been forgotten, right? So we talk about configuring centralized logging. This would typically be syslog or SNMP, and sending that data out to a SIEM, again, typically Splunk or something along those likes. And again, I talked a little bit earlier about that security posture score. A lot of folks don't know that that exists and that it's based off of your data protection solutions security best practices, but it is an easy way to just at a glance see where you stand against what they believe you should have configured for your environment. And then solutions, again, such as extended detection and response and automation and orchestration. These tools are typically managed by your security teams. And your backup environment can certainly feed into them, right? So you're going to feed alerts and events into the SIEM, but then they're going to have this XDR and SOAR integration. Could be something along the likes of Cisco XDR or Palo Alto XDR or Palo Cortex XSOAR, right? Bunch of different options out there to give you event correlation, because you are going to have so many events ingested into the SIEM. To have a human security analyst try to make sense of all that data quickly and efficiently, it's just impossible, right? So you want to have this sort of XDR and SOAR integration that can parse through all these logs and make sense of what's going on from your endpoints, from your hosts, and from your storage, as well as your network, and of course, your data protection platform, right? Trying to reduce that noise and just surface the critical events. Those platforms will have baked in alerting and response mechanisms, and of course, automation to get rid of or hopefully eliminate manual tasks, right? Again, think back to that security analyst manually just churning through all these events, trying to figure out what's going on from all these hundreds or thousands of endpoints or hosts. So leverage XDR, SOAR, and again, get to be good friends with your security team on-prem and make sure that the data protection landscape is covered by those solutions. Okay, something else that's pretty new for data protection is this concept of a two-person approval rule or more, right? More than two people. These are defined protected actions. Basically, they ensure that no person can perform a key operation on backup data without approval from a secondary user or maybe a team of users. Common names for this solution might be, again, two-person rule. Could be four eyes authorization or quorum. Right. So some of these vendors will allow you to create massive teams where it could have 10 additional approvers required If I log in, let's say to our Cyber Vault, and I want to do a restore for a user in our accounting department, just because I go in and click submit on this restore doesn't mean I'm gonna get that data right away. This approval rule is going to kick in, and it's going to notify the folks that are part of that quorum or part of the two-person rule that, hey, Zach is trying to recover some accounting data. Is this valid operation, or should you dig in to find out what he's trying to do? Right? So it's just additional oversight. You can also set that up to say, look, Zach has logged into our data protection platform, and he's trying to change NTP servers or DNS servers, or he's trying to change virtual IP addresses of the data protection cluster, right? So we can even go past the Cyber Vault scenario and say, look, it's really coming down to, hey, what if I'm trying to make cluster level changes? I want to make sure that Zach knows what he's doing before we approve this and let him go. And then just the basics of keeping software and firmware up to date, right? You think that would be a no-brainer, but I see it often where perhaps the base software is up to date, but it's missing critical security patches, right? So think about, these Linux-based platforms might have vulnerabilities or exploits that need to be patched. I see it all the time where they're just not being applied to the cluster. So make sure you're not only doing this long-term supported version of primary code, but that you're also applying security patches on top of those platforms. All right, and sort of to wrap up the basic, blocking and tackling of the infrastructure security for data protection, we want to make sure that support channel is disabled unless we're working with the primary or the backup support team, right? There's an active case, we're engaged with them, working with support, perhaps their engineering teams are involved as well. Outside of those times or outside of those scenarios, we want to make sure that the support channel is disabled. If you do need to enable it for working with a data protection support company and their support team, typically, you'll have the ability to say, look, I want to leave it open for maybe the next 2 days, right? Support had requested the ability to log in. They want to be able to grab logs. They want to be able to take a look at some configurations. Oh, and by the way, the engineering team at the data protection company, they want to get in as well to take a look and see if there's, a bigger issue they need to maybe, to apply a patch to or develop a patch for. But make sure that by default, your support channel is not enabled around the clock. And the next one is very simple, but I rarely see it enabled, right? It doesn't do anything to protect you from a malicious attacker, if you will, but it does improve overall security awareness, right? So if we've got this logon banner where I pull up the UI, or even if I pull up a shell, oftentimes even shell access will support this concept of a login banner. To inform users, right, terms and conditions of system access, and let them know that, hey, we've got real-time monitoring involved, right? Based off of these foundational components, hopefully you're going to go back and make sure you're syslogging, see if you've got SNMP enabled, let them know that you've got real-time monitoring. And if we've got folks trying to access the system and they shouldn't be, then we're going to have that information surface probably through that XDR and through that SOAR integration, and we'll be able to chase that down to see what was going on. And then last but not least, I want to touch upon some of these basic data protection rules that have been around for quite some time. If you've heard of the 3-2-1 rule, that is 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types. So today that is likely going to be local disk, and perhaps the second media type could be blob storage at a hyperscaler. Not that long ago, that second media type was probably tape, and perhaps some of you still have tape in the environment today. But it's more common today to see folks wanting to shift away from flipping tapes and sending them offsite for vaulting, and relying on blob storage at a hyperscaler. And then the 1 in the 3-2-1 is really an offsite copy of your data, right? So maybe you've got a DR data center and you've got a secondary copy of your backup platform over there, and you're doing replication to that secondary environment. But with the rise of ransomware, we've seen that 3-2-1 rule morph, right? So we've seen it grow and include a couple other things. So we still got the same basic 3-2-1, but then we have an additional 1, and that is 1 copy of your data offline. And that is equivalent or equates to that cyber vault that I talked about. And we're going to get into that just a little bit more. I've got a slide coming up where we'll talk about cyber vaulting. And then the 0 is, hey, 0 recovery errors. We want to make sure that you're testing recoveries. It's great that you're backing up data, but if you're not testing it, then we have a problem. We have a cyber event, right? Are you sure that you're going to be able to recover that data? Well, we want to have tests on a regular basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or annually, right? And run through various systems and make sure we're able to recover and we're recovering with no errors. Right, moving right along. Well, let's start to transition into some of the new components that these data protection platforms are folding in. okay? And specifically here, we're going to talk a little bit about threat detection, where we're on the hunt for malware. Now, all data protection systems today are going to give you some sort of basic anomaly detection, right? The ability to take a look at a snapshot and say something is just off based off previous snapshots, comparing those previous snapshots to the one that just came in. Something is not right. And they use basic machine language or machine learning to figure this out, where they will watch for things like your change rate, right? So if we see a typical 2 to 3% change rate on your VMs, and all of a sudden that is 90% plus change rate, very suspicious, right? I want to take a look at that snapshot. Things like bulk modifications, where we've got a ton of new files that were added, or maybe we had a bunch of files that were more than likely deleted in this scenario, right? Also a sign of possible ransomware or malware infection. And then also file extension changes, right? So if I've got a backup that's flagged as anomalous, I log in and I can see that, wow, all these Microsoft Office documents, right? They're no longer named .doc or .xls. They've all been renamed to .encrypt. Well, there's your sign, right? So just some basic things that they will watch for. One of the other components they will check for is entropy, or the randomness of your data. The higher the entropy rating, the more than likely your data has been encrypted, right? So kind of goes back to what we saw there with the change rate, where, oh man, normal 2 to 3% change rate is now 90% plus. Well, if all your data looks completely random compared to the previous snapshots, again, there's your sign. Now, with this basic anomaly detection, we typically have the ability to quarantine and block anomalous snapshots from being used. That's awesome, right? Because we don't want folks to come in that have the ability to, or the proper RBAC roles to restore data. We don't want them to come back in and try and recover data from an anomalous snapshot. Of course, that snapshot with this basic anomaly detection, it might be fine, right? Maybe there was a valid business process that went in and made some changes, right? Maybe it made a significant amount of changes, or maybe not. But the thing is that this basic anomaly detection typically leaves something to be desired, right? But it's included typically by default, no extra charge. If you want more in-depth threat detection, then these backup platforms typically offer a higher tier of licensing that will include it, or an add-on component that would give you the bits to perform the threat detection. But threat detection from a data security platform perspective today gives you the ability to take that basic anomaly detection and then leverage what we call indicators of compromise, okay? So we can crack open those snapshots and instead of just looking at things like the change rates and the modifications of file extensions, we can now use these IOCs to search for specific hashes that we know are malware related or ransomware related. You can run these threat detections manually, or you can have them kick off automatically after an anomalous snapshot is found. Sometimes these solutions or these threat detection capabilities are built in by the data protection vendor. Sometimes they will leverage third-party or best-of-breed threat feeds from the likes of CrowdStrike or Google or Qualys. Qualys used to be called Blue Hexagon. Or Laminar, right? Laminar is a company that data protection company called Rubrik purchased a couple of years ago, and it has become the foundation of their security infrastructure for their platform, right? So we've got that built in, always updated, typically on a daily basis, right? Keeping these IOCs up to date. But data protection platforms also have the ability to leverage something called YARA rules, and YARA stands for yet another recursive acronym. And YARA rules are text-based descriptions of patterns, right? Those patterns could be strings, they could be hexadecimal sequences, they could be other characteristics of malware. And in fact, I've got a screenshot over there on the right that shows a sample YARA rule, right? So very simple to define. It's got at the top, it's got a rule name. In this case, it's silent banker. Down below that, we've got a metadata section where we're describing what this rule is looking for. And then down below that, we have the specific strings, right, that we're searching for inside of this backup snapshot. And again, typically that's probably going to be something along the lines of a file hash. And then there are conditions to be met down below. So if A or B or C are met, then we're going to say that silent banker has been found in our environment, and that malware chain or that malware or ransomware variant is in the wild in our platform. We know it's there based off of those fingerprints. Typically, these platforms, right, these data protection platforms will show you the hash, and they may also provide you a nice link out to a website such as VirusTotal. If you haven't been out to VirusTotal, recommend you take a look at it. Great resource for looking up file hashes to see what they might be able to pull back from a specific variant, a ransomware variant. And I've got some screenshots at the very end in the last slide that talks about or sort of depicts that, shows you what it looks like. But easy way, free way to search through, right? Take this hash and say, okay, this was related to Lockbit in our environment, or it was related to Mimikatz in our environment. But you're not going to get that from the basic snapshot detection in the environment. You need that additional threat detection level and intelligence to surface that. So once we've detected a threat, wouldn't it be nice if we could say, okay, well, what data was impacted? Well, sure enough, these new platforms, right, data protection platforms also include data classification now. Again, we're focusing on data that has been ingested into the data protection platform. But it allows us to sort of identify the severity of the attack, right? We can use this in conjunction, again, with IOCs found either through the automatic scanning from third-party integration or from YARA rules that we've got set up and configured. And we can classify these according to compliance regulations such as HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, et cetera. A lot of these platforms will come with several hundred of these sort of policies built for you out of the box that you can pick from and apply them. But you can also have the ability to create your own rules and your own policies if those built-in out of the box ones don't match your needs, right? So you can go in there and customize them. What's really cool about the data classification here is that they do leverage machine learning, and they also leverage natural language processing and a subcomponent of NLP called named entity recognition. Basically allows us to understand, right, what we're talking about, like natural speech inside of a document, semantics, vocabulary, understanding the context being used inside of a document. So for example, if the word Brooklyn is found inside of a document, NLP and NER can help you, can actually go in and say, okay, well, are we talking about Brooklyn, the city, or are we talking about Brooklyn, the name of a person? Okay. And the so what about data classification is, look, if we've got this sort of double exfiltration event going on, or double ransomware event, if you will, double extortion, then we want to be able to say, okay, we had this kind of data was impacted. And look, we have these indexes, we have these hashes of the data. We want to be able to pass that along to an integration. Thanks to this platform, right? We've got additional integrations out to security platforms such as perhaps a Zscaler that could help us block and prevent that data from being sent outside of the environment. So data classification can help us prevent data from being stolen and then put out onto the dark web for purchase, or again, that double extortion scenario. And I've got a little screen capture here that's showing a little capture from a next-gen security or a backup vendor. Shows 23 gigabytes of data was from a classification perspective was scanned, and then we've got 360 different patterns matched. Okay, and breaking that down over on the right, you can see that we've got a fair amount of high severity patterns that were matched. We can see some related to credit cards, some related to usernames. I've seen some where password lists will show up under that high security heading, right? But it'll also break down what's deemed medium security risk and then what would be a low security risk in the environment. But again, this is an add-on to that basic anomaly detection. You get the, let's say you subscribe to or you pay for that additional threat detection. You'll also get this data classification ability and the ability to prevent that data exfiltration as well. Okay, Cyber Vault. So I know I mentioned this previously on a couple of the slides, right? This is our ability through these next-gen platforms for data protection to give you a logical air-gapped copy of your data, right? So think of it as isolated, completely separate from your production environment. It has nothing to do with the user accounts in your production environment at all. It is a completely separate set of accounts used to manage it and to log in, to perform recoveries out of this vault, right? So we're trying to minimize that risk of ransomware or insider threats reaching these vault copies. So these are off-prem, again, typically managed by your data protection provider. They will leverage immutability, right? That's great, but it's not where we stop. We need to also leverage on that worm technology. And these platforms, these cyber vaults typically do live in hyperscalers. So think along the lines of AWS or Azure. And since we're talking about blob storage, We're going to leverage object lock to prevent those snapshots from being deleted, again, based off of the retention time. These are cloud-based, which is great. There's not a lot of on-prem setup to be done. You don't have to set up a large storage frame at a DR location and go through weeks and weeks of professional services engagements to get this figured out. I've seen these cyber vaults, set up within an hour, and you've got data replicating into it. So very simple to maintain to give you that logical air-gapped infrastructure. And again, the separation of duties is really critical, right? Again, bringing in zero trust principles or zero trust architecture. Got that clear line of administrative separation between on-prem and this cyber vault. So we're going to ensure basically that a user can't impact a production environment as well as getting access to that vault data with the same set of credentials. Policy-driven automation, this is great. Once the vault is set up and we've got data replicating into it, it's pretty much set it and forget it. It doesn't take a lot of care and feeding from a human to go in and get these replications kicked off and make sure that they're working. You can just get a nice report showing that your vault is sending data out on a regular basis and that it's successful. These cyber vaults will also allow you to define a data transfer window, right? Which is basically you'll be able to configure a time window that you can send data up into that vault. And then outside of that time window, whatever you define, there's a logical severing of that connection to the cyber vault, right? And basically all these platforms are going to support that data transfer window and give you the ability to control when and when you cannot send data out to your vault. And that same two-person rule or quorum rule or four eyes authorization that we talked about on previous slides, they come into play here as well, right? So again, if I log into the vault and I'm trying to recover some data for that user in accounting, if I've got that quorum set up or that approval rule set up, it's going to take additional oversight or someone else to take a look at that and approve my request, right? So I just don't get access to whatever I want inside of our cyber vault. There are additional checks and balances in place to make sure that is a valid business reason for me to be requesting that data. That is our last golden copy, if you will, stored inside that cyber vault. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about those basic foundational components, right? What I typically see in environments that aren't always configured. We've talked about threat detection. We've talked about data classification, and we talked about cyber vaulting, right? So what if there is an unfortunate event, right? And unfortunately, it's probably not a matter of if, but when an event is going to happen in today's age. Well, we want to make sure that we're partnering up with other folks in the environment that manage security. This is a team sport, right? So if there's an event, we can't go it alone from a data protection perspective. We need to get the security team involved because they manage that XDR, the EDR, and that SOAR environment that's critical that you've been feeding events into. Right? And they're going to have telemetry from other systems. Again, your virtual machines, databases, everything that's reporting in, they're going to have that XDR and that SOAR capability to weed out, right, filter out that noise and only surface the critical incidents. Your backup vendors, they have cyber response teams available. So if you are hit by malware, if you're hit by ransomware, call them immediately. Get them on the line and let them know you've been hit. They will work with you from the beginning till the end, right? Recovery is complete to make sure they get you guys back online. All the vendors have it. It's available to you, right? Typically no cost. You just call up, let them know, hey, ransomware event, and they're going to get them engaged. I do also recommend, right, some sort of external security expert as well. I listed just an example, right? I know that Mandiant Incident Response Services is a popular one. Mandiant was purchased by Google some time ago, but that's a service where you basically have security experts on retainer, and if you've got an event, you can call them up, and within a defined SLA, an hour or two, right, you'll be able to log in or actually get engaged with their security experts to give you additional insight and air coverage as well as you go through the recovery process. You will want to be able to identify your clean points in time, right? So these next-gen data protection solutions, you're going to be able to have that anomaly detection for your snapshots as well as that threat detection. And you'll be able to figure out which last known good backup you have, right? Which one was deemed clean by the backup solution? Which one didn't find, or which snapshot did not have those indicators of compromise? Think of the ransomware, not only the executables, but also attacker tools that might be present in the environment, right? We want to make sure that we're free of all those components from that backup. And you can see my little graphic there to the side where, June 9th and June 8th, thanks to the anomaly detection, thanks to the advanced threat detection, We know that those have indicators of compromise. There's something malicious inside those snapshots. However, going back to June 7th, the threat detection did not find any indicators of compromise in that snapshot. Okay, so we can look at that one and think, okay, that might be our clean copy to go back to, right? You may want to consider extending your retention of those clean backups, right? Because this could be a large amount of data that was impacted the environment. And depending on your retention, right, the last thing you'd want to have happen is your clean snapshots expire. So either you'd have the ability to go in and say, okay, I want to extend this from June 7th. I'm going to extend it for 30 days or 60 days. And then we need to also consider, again, that amount of data to be restored, right? So are you able to meet your recovery time objectives? If you have a large 200 terabyte database and the business says we've got to have that back within 2 hours, can your backup platform handle that? Does it have the ability to push that much data back into production within that time frame? So we need to know if we can meet our RTOs as well. And then we need to have a trusted recovery process. Something that the backup vendors these days are talking about quite often in the security conversations is this concept of a clean room, right? Or an isolated recovery environment. They can be on-prem. They could also be cloud-based, right? So this could be something set up with VMware or maybe Acropolis hypervisor if you're a Nutanix shop. Or perhaps if you're cloud-based or mostly cloud native, you could just set this up inside of AWS, or you could set this up inside of, say, Azure, right? But you want to have this isolated recovery environment created ahead of time, waiting for use. The time to deploy is not when you get hit with ransomware, right? We want to have everything ready to go. We want to have procedures in place, fully documented, and waiting to be used. Data protection companies are also recommending that you have a digital jump bag ready to go, right? This would be essential tools for recovery, waiting for you to use inside that isolated recovery environment. Think of things like ISOs, right, to rebuild systems. Could be additional security software provided by your security team, right, that could be used to scan again, right? We want to make sure to scan that clean snapshot, maybe with a different security solution, just to make sure that its indicators of compromise didn't find anything, right? So additional oversight or an additional look into the data. Any configuration files that might be pertinent to your environment, and as well as documentation. It is critical to be able to prioritize your recovery of your mission critical applications inside of your environment. So do you have an application map today that's up to date? Do you understand the dependencies between these different systems, these different critical applications? And has the business given you a maximum acceptable outage time, right? That'll go and play back into, hey, are we able to meet our RTO? Okay, so you need to understand those critical systems, how much time you have to recover. And then ultimately, we want to get to the point where we've got some automation in place so we don't have to do all this manual work, right? So think along the lines of how you could leverage APIs in your environment from the backup solution, scripting, right? A lot of your providers out there today will have, if you got to GitHub, right, you'll be able to find predefined scripts that you can modify for your environment, easy to use. But you may also have vendor-specific recovery workflows available through a UI, right? So if you think along the likes of Zerto, for example, Zerto has the ability to define runbooks or playbooks, right? So during a failover process, if I need to fail over a set of VMs from site A to site B, I can go ahead and define, say, the order of operations there, VM list. I can say, look, I want to run some scripts in between here or between these systems when they're brought up to do some testing. So you can define those ahead of time. Maybe networks needs to be changed, right? So maybe we don't have stretch layer 2 networks. Maybe if I have to fail over from site A to site B, my IP addresses need to change. DNS needs to change. All that good stuff can be predefined inside of those playbooks. Ultimately, right, we want to have a solid root cause analysis. Your data protection, cyber response teams that you're working with from support will help you with that. External security experts, again, I'd mentioned Mandiant, right? Again, not the only one out there, but one that's very common. They will be able to help you with root cause analysis. We never want to let a good crisis go to waste. We want to come out of those events a little bit smarter, right? A little more prepared for the next time if it happens. But we want to be able to, in these root cause analysis, we want to be able to pinpoint the infection method and neutralize that gap so we don't get reinfected, right? Maybe it was just a missing patch on a specific system that allowed a malicious threat actor to get in. We want to make sure it's taken care of. Gives us the ability to evaluate our response time, right? How much data was lost? Did we know what kind of data was lost? Hopefully so, for leveraging that data classification inside these data protection platforms. And then also system resilience, right? We need to consider, do we need to make any modifications for resiliency? And then lastly, right, we want to update our incident response playbooks and the backup policies as needed. All right, getting down to the home stretch here, just a couple more slides. I do want to talk about restore testing. This is near and dear to me because I see quite often where organizations of all size, they do have data protection in place. They're backing up, they're doing restores, but they don't do consistent testing. Or if they're doing testing, maybe they're just testing very simple systems, right? Think standalone SQL, but they've got always on availability groups or failover clusters in play, right? So it's not just testing the same systems over and over, and it's not just testing simple applications. This is where your application map, right, can come into play and help you look and say, okay, these are the critical systems. How often are we testing them, right? Is it never today? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? And we want to test restores from our various repositories, right? Yes, we want to test from on-prem local disk. What about our replication target if we're replicating to a secondary backup platform at a DR location? And then what about the cyber vault? Have we tested recoveries out of that cyber vault? Have we tested our quorum or multi or two-person approval rules, right? We want to make sure we're testing from all those different recovery points. We want to validate our RPOs. Are we backing up frequently enough? VMs we're doing once a day. Databases we're doing once a day. Log files, maybe we're doing those database log files, backing those up every hour, but maybe that's not sufficient. Maybe we need to do them every 15 minutes. So how often are you taking a look at your RPOs and make sure they're aligning with your business needs? And then again, your RTOs, those are just as critical, right? We need to be able to get this data back quickly. We can't be waiting weeks or months to get this full set of data back. Pretty much useless at that point of view, right? Or at that point in time. So we need to make sure we can get data back in bulk, securely and quickly. Infrastructure readiness, right? Basically, we want to make sure we've got the storage, the compute, the network that can support these operations at scale, especially if we're talking about a large amount of data. We're talking about improving the staff preparedness, right? We want to keep the IT teams familiar with the restore procedures. And I guess that begs to ask the question, do you have recovery procedures? And if you do, where are they stored? Are they stored on a file system that could be at some point impacted by ransomware and encrypted? Well, then what do? Right? If your restore procedures are encrypted, it's going to be hard to work off of those, right? So do you have offline copies? Where are those stored? Do you have DR binders that you keep up to date? Right? So some things to think about there. Ultimately, we're just trying to improve that response time during an actual incident. So we're not scrambling, trying to figure out how do we restore, what do we restore, in what order. And ultimately, it's going to help you demonstrate compliance, right? Supports that regulatory and audit requirements by showing documented proof of successful restore capabilities. And again, a lot of these new platforms of data protection, they're going to have the ability to go out and do test recoveries for you and then give you this nice set of documentation or reporting back that you can hand off to internal audit teams or external auditors as you see fit, right? So we've got lots of built-in auditing as well. All right, last slide. I know we're coming up on time as well, so this worked out pretty good. But resources, right? So I talked about VirusTotal, and that's a great resource for you guys to leverage with your current data protection platforms, or if you're looking at a new sort of a next-gen data protection vendor, great solution for you to be able to take file hashes to and quickly search and then see what's pulled back, right? So the two screenshots I've got here are from VirusTotal. The top one shows that search bar where you can see, you can paste in a URL, an IP address, a domain, or that also important file hash. And then down below, you'll see actually we had a file hash submitted and it came back as Mimikatz, right? So if you're not familiar with Mimikatz, that is a credential hacking tool, right? Commonly used with Active Directory to crack credentials and then gain system to access the systems from there. So VirusTotal, again, sometimes these backup platforms will include links out. So you'll see the hash that was found in an IOC from a threat detection. Be able to click on that link and it will take you right to the results page on VirusTotal. I've included some security hardening guides as well. All the vendors have it, so if you don't see your provider listed here, don't worry. A quick Google search will surface it, but they've all got it, right? So again, it's going to be those common things like MFA, SSO. Do we have that login banner? Are we doing NTP authentication, right? So those common things. that you'll be able to get access to. Some of these are freely available on the internet, and some of them are gated. So, for example, I know Cohesities is behind a support portal access. So if you're a current Cohesity user, you can log into their support portal and then access that hardening guide. But several of those, right, Commvault, I believe the Veeam and the Zerto, right, those are just available for you to click on and get access to. I've got a link to Mandiant and their incident response services. Again, they're not the only player in the field, but they are quite popular. But they've got retainer options, right? Guaranteed response times. They can help you with communication planning and response. That's critical for the business and for customers. They will often bring in their own set or their own toolkit to do threat detection, right? Think of IOCs or indicators of compromise again. And ultimately, right, they can help you with that root cause analysis and remediation. And again, make us a little bit smarter in case this event or something similar happens in the future. And Yara rules, right? I mentioned that on the threat detection slide earlier in my presentation. Got a link out here to Yara website that you can get access to some sample rules that will help you guys create your own and allow you to do your own threat hunts using those simple Yara rules with a rule definition, metadata, again, the condition, right, and the strings that would contain your hashes. So we can get you guys a copy of this presentation so you can have access to these links if you would like. And with that, that is the last slide. So that's it. And I will pass it back over to Colleen for a quick wrap.
Sure. And I know we're at the top of the hour already, but I would like to open it up for any questions that you have of Zach before we adjourn today. So please let us know. You can just put it in the chat or we can unmute your line. All right. Well, I will send out a copy of the presentation today to those folks that attended. Just want to let my Blue Cross plans and subsidiary companies know what my contact information is. If you'd like to reach out to me for anything, please do so. You have both my cell phone number here and my email. And thank you so much for attending our webinar this afternoon.
Thank you.